you for joining us tonight for our first show of the year. I'm your host, Bill Dixon, for the Lessons of Vietnam show. And if I can get Amnon to show that first slide, please. There it is. I'm your host, the Lessons of Vietnam show. We're broadcasting by the good graces of Nissan Communications, Amnon Nissan, which I'll introduce you to in a moment. We're broadcasting from his worldwide headquarters in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you'd like to participate in the show, we ask you to always do that if you can. Call us at 919-518-9773. We have made some changes. Emma, can we still use computers 2K voice?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and if you want to come in on Skype at computers 2K voice and make comments or be on the air, you're welcome to do that anytime. So I want to do a little bit of commercial tonight. Thank you for joining us for joining us for the 2020 shows. I know 2020 was a challenge in a lot of ways. Our viewership increased dramatically. Thank you for being part of that. Please share with anyone that you may have an interest in the true Vietnam story. The Lessons of Vietnam show is a two-man operation. Amnon, the owner of Nissan Communications, gave me the time slot to do the show and handles all the buttons and technical stuff. I just sit in front of the camera. My job is to decide on the subject, research it, and put the show together, checking out the validity of the information as much as I can, and then host the show, which is the easy part. You probably have noticed that I speak Southern and have a hard time pronouncing, I can't even say that, pronunciation quite often. And I need your help, though. As you can see, I'm not a professional broadcaster, just a Vietnam veteran with a passion to share the true story of Vietnam and its war. Please continue to reach out to me or Amnon with your suggestions and input, whether it's to tell me how to improve my presentation or question what you heard about the Vietnam War. Please give me your input for the good and especially the bad. Trying to make it as good as we can. We have improved quite a bit since we started this thing several years ago, but always looking for ways to improve. I know I make strange noises sometimes. One of our viewers said that sometimes when I over-explain things, they feel I'm talking down to them. Please don't ever feel that way. I'm talking down to anyone, at least places. I would do that. The show is watched by a wide range of people. Interested in the period of history, Vietnam veterans, people who are doing research, students in the lessons of Vietnam. And sometimes I find, especially with guests and their Vietnam veterans, we speak militaries. And it's hard for me to always go back and remember. Tell you what, I'm gonna speak some militaries now. Tango, Hotel, Alpha, November, Yankee, Oscar, uniform. I just sent you a secret message. All you got to do is figure out what it is and tell me at the end of the show what it was. Now, our show is an offshoot tonight of one of our previous shows. A fellow Vietnam veteran sent me his rants that make up tonight's and the 27th of January show. It's going to be a two-parter. I felt it was a great truth piece and asked Tom Fryer to be my guest. But Tom declined as he felt that he was not much of a talker. He hadn't heard me. But gave me permission to use his extensive research in understanding the Vietnam War. This is not a political piece, but a well-researched expose. Please stay with us. I know you'll be glad you did. He does talk a little bit about little politics in here. He does pick on one particular party, but stay with us. And I think at the end, you'll understand why and so forth, because what he's put down there is the truth, and I'm very good at that. Now, if you're out there and you're a veteran or you know a veteran, especially coming off the holidays and so forth, we still don't seem to be getting away from this COVID stuff. If you not feeling good about yourself, or you're in a crisis or hurting or whatever, please call this number, 1-800-273-8255, and then be sure to press 1. And that will get you to someone who cares and we're willing to talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. So reach out if you're a veteran and get some help. I know at a long time before I was able to reach out and touch the vet centers, A friend of mine who works there, Moses Gloria, for years tried to get me to go in and buy everything but kidnap me. But now that I go, it's fantastic. So reach out to somebody. They're out there. Now let's get started on the show and introduce you to Tom's piece. Here it is, Understanding the Vietnam War, an incoming rant from a frustrated Vietnam veteran. Victory was ours, but we were not allowed to win. So how can we who fulfill our duty to serve honorably retreat from seeking the truth? And Tom Fryer was in Vietnam from 1965 to 1966. I think you're going to be very surprised at some of the truths he brings out, and he's all world research. The following edict in most of our Vietnam veterans' social media groups today is a thorny issue. He got a lot of this information coming from, he went on to Facebook chat rooms and talked to a lot of Vietnam veterans and so forth. And Vietnam veterans are about as confused about the Vietnam War as the public is. No political post. Your post will be deleted and you could be removed from the group. That's the standard thing for all the Vietnam vet sites, and I understand why. Arguing over political issues of the war is often poorly received and becomes fruitless. When a political post alienates a brother, sister who may have different opinions, those disagreements often boil over into arguments, and many threaten to leave the group. But on the other hand, from a conflicting point of view, there is a grave danger to the status quo, politically correct, thinking of not talking about the politics of the Vietnam War. Avoiding productive discussions about the politics of war has led to misunderstandings of the war, pent-up emotions, and division among the veterans. There's more at stake here than our social media groups concerning about losing members. The collective ethic of our consciences ought to be, how can the Vietnam Brotherhood refrain from talking about the politics of the Vietnam War when the war was the most politicized, mismanaged, misunderstood, misrepresented war in the history of our country? How can we who were there permit history to be muzzled or rewritten for future generations, as it already been done? How can we return home? How can we who return home permit discussions to continue that whose names are etched in the black granite have died in vain? Our emotional strong bond is a consequence of the ingrained, hurtful memories of the anti-war movement deflected to us. The steadfast soldiers, the deep-rooted feelings of the betrayed, that the crippling rules of engagement with the mindset to achieve political ends conveyed, and those painful memories of the disloyalty demonstrated at our homecoming in the days that followed, with the insults, name-calling, and ingratitude. The Vietnam War has been rewritten by the biased historians and journalists, misrepresented by academia, and distorted in Hollywood movies and in most media forms, and more recently by the Ken Burns documentary. So under all those circumstances, how can we, the Brotherhood, retreat from seeking the truth? Just about every Vietnam veteran today knows that the war was politically motivated and cold-hearted mishandled. However, we are not all in agreement as to the truthful history of the war, who is responsible, and what that mindset was to accomplish political ends. For most of us, our opinions of the war were shaped as young, innocent, and uninformed soldiers. And today, based on Vietnam veterans chat rooms comments, many may still have strong desire to defend those early opinions. They regard it as a truth when there is strong evidence of the contrary, which is what brought this show out about. Over time, for many of those opinions have changed by uncovering those politically imposed and alleged untruths. Can we be honest with ourselves and not be self-deceived? Self-deception is believing things that are not true and trying to fool oneself into believing things that are not true without seeking the truth. So, after all we've been through, how can that brotherhood be divided? Can we unite and bear witness to the factual history of the war that has impacted you and our nation and the honor of those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice? And let's not forget our allies who served and died, and all the South Vietnamese who perished, or who were tortured, driven out of their homeland, or put in re-education camps and lost their freedom. The intent is not to crash through doors already open with the great works by many patriotic writers who have uncovered the truths of the war, especially the following books: H.R. McMaster's in his book, Dereliction of Duty, or The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Vietnam War by Philip Jennings, or in Top Gun by Dan Peterson, and Shelby Stanton's book, The Rise and Fall of American Army. Stanton's book is well-researched and written book with a complete history of ground forces in Vietnam. Those truth-revealing books are a must-read for every Vietnam veteran and anybody out there who's interested in the truth about the Vietnam War. The original intention of writing this rant was to keep an old veteran's mind active, triggered by the desire to personally come to an understanding of the war. However, that desire became an urgency after a few years in our veterans' social media chat rooms, when the division and misunderstanding of the war among our Vietnam brothers became a concern and a frustration. So the mission is to find the truthful history of the war. Who's responsible? And what was the mindset to accomplish political ends? Then, number one, coming out to understand of the war. Two, with that understanding, come to a peace with the war. And three, was that peace unite, defend, and share those truths. Then together, we can stand tall, for we have fulfilled our duty, not only to our consciences, but most importantly to those who don't have a voice, our brothers who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. I'm going to add that to our children as they come along. But take notice, don't expect this rant to follow in all essay writing and grammar guidelines. This is exactly what it says it is, an incoming rant directed to the brotherhood. It is an armed and aimed to bring the foremost truths of the war to light. It's a rant emotionally charged, but with objectives and rational thought. Somewhat repetitious, but for a cause. A rant fortified with facts, not opinion, facts which uncover, isolate, and under examination and question expose those pertinent untruths of the war. And those untruths lead to the same conclusion that every step along the way there was a theme of deception, restraining or obstructing military means with a fixed mindset to achieve political ends. You can draw your own conclusion with the following facts that are presented. But it becomes clear who was responsible and what political mindset was. Those truths cannot be denied, but be advised, uncovering the truths are not easy. Many of the truths of the war could not be covered up, however. Many of these facts today can only be found buried beneath the surface of deliberate lies and deceptions. You will discover early in your search process, if you wish to do so, who are the real gatekeepers of the truths of the Vietnam War today. The ones who control access to and dissemination of those truths. You will learn that early in your research, the facts of the war have been obscured with false information and deliberately and unhandily spread in order to influence public opinion. There has been a suppression of the truth with lies, deception, disinformation, and half-truths to shield those who have mishandled the war, and more sinister to hide the motives why. Don't get trapped by the internet search engines that will try to lead you through the minefields of controlled material that may not be factual. Don't trust the advice from a fact-checking site until you research the history of that site and who controls it. Important. Many of those sites have been bought out and taken over to suppress the truths. So watch out for those politically booby traps. You must have the desire to probe deep enough to look at the evidence or facts that you too will discover that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was a deceitful fabrication. As a result, almost every step along the way to the end of the war, there was a theme of deception, restraining or obstructing military means with a mindset to achieve political ends. And then all the dishonesty begs the question, why? As you read onward, the fog of deceit is lifted and brings clarity to reveal the truths of why. The Ken Burns documentary of the Vietnam War and that aired on PBS alleged that the war was unjust and not winnable, and America was inept and in the wrong. However, as you continue to read further, you will discover that his selective omissions and what he overlooked must concern every veteran and every American. Burns had gone to great lengths to depict that it was a humiliating defeat for America. But then you will understand, how could America, as the American people who were led astray by the lies of the war, be inept or in the wrong? How can America, as in the hog-tied military command, be responsible for limiting or obstructing military means without a mindset to achieve political end? How can America, as in our serving soldiers who gave their oath to serve honorably and those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for their country, be held accountable? It will become clear that it was an American political party that was inept, grossly irresponsible, and wholly blameable for the misfortunes of the war. Historian Louis Fanning Betrayal in Vietnam, said, it wasn't the Hanoi communists who won the war, but rather American Congress that lost it. Let's put his quote in a more meaningful way. It wasn't the Hanoi communists who won the war, but rather an American political party who controlled Congress that did not allow us to win the war. The blame for the political mindset, the fabrication, failures, and fiascos of the war cannot now be shared. Cannot be shared. The reason, but we're going to share the outcome. So it becomes important to single out which political party controlled Congress during the war. This is the part I'm talking about. Just follow through with us. The congressional records make it perfectly clear who had control of Congress during the war years. One which had the most influence of those controlling military decisions that politicized the war and obstructed the outcome of the war. It's no mystery who controlled Congress from August 7, 1964, Gulf of Tonkin resolution under President Johnson to the end of the war. As we moved forward, it became clear which party had the most control and influence on the majority of military decisions and strategies of the war. And it also became clear to Hanoi who had to defeat not America, but the controlled Democratic Party. But hold on. It's a disgrace to those who died if you start reading it now because of your political party affiliations. Okay. Sure, they will counterattack and say that this paper is nothing but partisan and revisionism instead of trying to disprove those truths in the wars presented. Or they will attack the author as a dishonest, unqualified partisan, and their favorite counteroffensive, or they will fact check and direct you to the numerous sites where they have rewritten the history of the war. So damn it, don't fool yourself into believing things that are not true without continuing and discovering the truth. In other words, stay on until the end of the show. Don't be fooled. We were not defeated, but cheated out of victory. We're not allowed to win. We were betrayed. The truth never fears investigation. As those truths unfold under main headings, it will become evident that there are not one's opinions, but armored-plated facts. And while those truths will rise to the surface, will justice and what was once the American way find the light of day? President Johnson's apprehensions, his poll numbers, public opinion of his handling of the war, his party a pressure to win the next election, fear of China and Russia involvement, and his ambitious domestic visions all compounded the problems of coming to and winning a limited war. Johnson and McNamara didn't allow our military to fight a war to win it. As Colonel Arthur Gregory said, most of the war was about 15% military and 85% political. The cause and effect relationship of Johnson's trepidations led to digging a hole that he and his alter ego, McNamara, and his so-called war managers could not get out of. We will begin with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that gave Johnson full authority for military actions by his misled Congress without declaring war was unconstitutional and deceitful fabrications. When we ask why questions and dig deeper into the details, the truths are uncovered. Then it will become clear what the Democrats, under the cover of anti-war movements and relentless TV war exposure, were up to on the home front. The lack of not being totally committed to the war led to flawed individual rotation policy and an escalation of the war that activated an out of control yet well-organized anti-war movement deflected to us, the serving soldiers. Reporters embedded with the troops resulted in relentless and often biased TV coverage that oftentimes battered public confidence, aided and abetted the enemy, and supported a political party. Johnson's political meddling, tying the hands of his military command with crippling rules of engagement, full rank on military logic and common sense. The 1968 Tet Offensive was an outright victory for the U.S., but the Democratic-controlled Congress, rather than striking while the iron was hot to act decisively and take the opportunity to win the war, portrayed it with fake news as a stalemate and turning point for Hanoi. When in reality, they wanted to bail out of the war to salvage winning the next election and to use the power of the purse to finance their socialistic victories on a different war front, the war on poverty. Nixon inherited Johnson's model and had to manage the war under the watchful eye and the heavy foot of the Democratic-controlled Congress. The Pentagon Papers were a far-fetched deception and alibi for failure, yet it became a forged passport to escape accountability. Watergate became a political and media assassination of a president and forced Nixon to resign. Hanoi understood the political nature of the war, and then on and off again, Paris peace accords were destined for failure. Don't be fooled. We were not defeated, but cheated out of victory. We were not allowed to win. And when Johnny came marching home, it wasn't with bursting pride to the hearty welcome of cheers, Johnny come home alone, with wounded emotions as a result of insults, name-calling, and ingratitude. And to this day, Johnny still carries the war's emotional baggage. Let's look at those supporting facts that you too can also discover in the congressional records. The National Archives, Declassified Archives, Aviation History, Air Force Database, the War College, the Virtual Vietnam Archive at Vietnam Center and Archive at Texas Tech University, and in many other documented accounts, including digging into some of the estimated 3,000 books written on the war. But be aware, many of those books were written in university circles whose authors were part of the anti-war crowd or their biased journalism. Now, 5 decades later, many of the truths have lost ground and are buried deep into the internet searches lying beneath the surface of deliberate lies and deceptions. Let's move forward and bring the light of day into darkness, in dark places. As we begin our search to uncover the truths and what became Johnson's war by the means of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution and his actual deployment and escalation of Americans' combat forces, arm yourself with a growth mindset of understanding the war. Hiram Johnson said, "The first casualty when war comes is truth." The Vietnam War build up began on the basis of a falsified intelligence, an unproven second attack and deceitful fabrication called the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And today, the lockstep media still weaponize those deceits, continues to bombard us with lies, and slaughters the truth. On August 7th of August, 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It gave President Johnson full authority for military action without declaring war. It permitted the president to take all necessary measures to prevent any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. The American command's mission in Vietnam was to assist the Republic of Vietnam and its war against the communist insurgents, the Viet Cong. However, a political party had a different mission in mind. A point of fact is that most of our veterans discovered after the war that President Johnson lied about the second attack on the destroyer Maddox on August 4th, 1964. In 1964, Gulf of Tonkin resolution was unanimously passed on an alleged August 4th, 1964 attack. The official story was that the North Vietnamese torpedo boats launched an unprovoked attack against U.S. destroyers on routine patrol in the Tonkin Gulf on August 2nd, and that North Vietnamese PT boats followed up with a deliberate attack on a pair of U.S. ships 2 days later. Rather than being on a routine patrol on August the 2nd, the U.S. destroyer Maddox was actually engaged in an aggressive intelligence gathering maneuvers in sync with coordinated attacks on North Vietnamese by the South Vietnamese Navy and Laotian Air Force. The day before, 2 attacks of North Vietnam had taken place, writes scholar Daniel C. Halen. Those assaults were part of a campaign of increasing military presence on the North that the United States had been pursuing since early 1964. On the night of August 4th, the Pentagon proclaimed that a second attack by North Vietnamese PT boats had occurred earlier that day in the Tonkin Gulf. Report cited by President Johnson as he went on national TV that evening to announce a momentous escalation of the war, airstrikes against North Vietnam. But let's look at the timeline. The North Vietnamese fired on a U.S. destroyer anchored in the Gulf of Tonkin on August 2nd, 1964. President Johnson falsely claimed that there had been a second attack on the destroyer on August 4th, 1964. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution on 7 August 1964. Full-scale U.S. intervention in the Vietnam War was authorized. Today, they write, in effect, the measure granted Johnson the constitutional authority to conduct a war in Vietnam. However, the truth is Congress supported the resolution with the assumption that the president would return and seek their support before engaging in additional escalations of the war. When the resolution passed, Senator Wayne Morris declared that Congress had surrendered its authority and therefore the authority of the people it was elected to serve. Morse also deplored the open-ended nature of the approval and condemned Congress for giving the president and the militia a blank check, which would be cashed with taxpayers' money and citizens' lives. An attempt to repeal the resolution was defeated March 6, 1966. Read the proceedings and debate of the 88th Congress second session, August 20th, 1964. Further digging will uncover 3 facts to support the second attack was a fabrication. 1. Unspoken during the 88th Congress debate over the resolution that the commanders of the U.S. destroyer could not state with absolute accuracy that ship had actually been attacked on the night of August 4th. Nor was any mention made of the fact that the U.S. destroyers had been assisting South Vietnamese commandos in their attacks on North Vietnamese military installations. Number 2, in 1995, Vo Nguyen Giap, who had been North Vietnamese military commander during the Vietnam War, acknowledged the August 2nd attack on the Maddox, but denied that the Vietnamese had launched another attack on August 4th, as the Johnson administration had claimed at the time. 3, years later, Johnson's Secretary of Defense admitted the reasons for getting into the war were made up. The fog of war. The former United States Secretary of Defense Robert S. McNamara admitted that the August 2nd USS Maddox attack happened with no Defense Department response, but the August 4th Gulf of Tonkin attack never happened. In 1995, McNamara met with former Vietnam People's Army General Wen Gipp to ask what happened on August 4th, 1964, in the second Gulf of Tonkin incident. Absolutely nothing, Gipp replied. Gipp claimed that the attack had been imaginary. In 2005, an international national security agency historical study was declassified. It determined that the Maddox had engaged in North Vietnamese Navy on August 2nd, but there were no North Vietnamese naval vessels present during the incident on August 4th, 1964. The dishonesty of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution surely raises questions to expose and challenge the lies and the reasons why. Why did Johnson and his administration deceive the country about the alleged August 4th attack, which resulted in the Gulf of Tonkin resolution? What did he intend to accomplish by the war? One that armed him with an unconstitutional free rein and a blank check for military action, given to him by a Democratic-controlled Congress and those Republicans who were lied to and deceived. Keep an open mind as we move forward. If the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was a lie, we must question what else must be a lie. The Ken Burns Vietnam War documentary also kept the American people uninformed of the Gulf of Tonkin fabrication. Victor Lasky, in his book, It Didn't Start with Watergate, uncovers the lie and exposes the reasons why. He said Johnson made up his mind to escalate the conflict by bombing North Vietnam, a fact later confided to Charles W. Roberts of Newsweek, as he did not want to take Congress in his confidence. He ordered his national security advisor, George Bundy, to draw a resolution which would give him a free hand in Vietnam. The idea was to send it to Congress for approval at the proper time. It was written a year in advance. Bundy later confirmed there was such a draft explaining, we had always anticipated the possibility that things might take a more drastic turn at any time. That right time came after U.S. Maddox was attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. What was Johnson's political ploy? First, it's important to examine and put into perspective a few pertinent quotes by renowned Prussian General Clausewitz on war. He wrote, "Nobody starts a war, or rather, no one in his sense ought to do so, without clear in his mind what he intends to achieve by the war and how he intends to conduct it." Clausewitz goes on to say, the political objective, the goal is the motive for the war, will thus determine both the military objective to be reached and the amount of efforts it requires, and the military objective is the means to achieve it. Destruction of the enemy's armed forces is the highest aim in the war. Johnson addressed the nation and stated that the political objective was to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, and the military objective was to win the war. However, it became clear that there was a different agenda for the war, and Clausewitz's principles was violated by Johnson. And it will become clear that it was a great focus and effort on a different war. If you follow the timeline on both Johnson's domestic war on property and the Vietnam War, the truths unfold. In his State of the Union address on January 8, 1964, in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement, President Johnson informed the nation that he had declared an unconditional war on poverty in America. And then on 7 August 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Johnson informed Congress that the Vietnam War would only last 2 or 3 years. Also on 7th of August 1964, and throughout the war, Senator Wayne Morris took great fear on constitutional grounds with the Johnson administration. Deception of practices. This included withholding of information from not only the public, but Congress. Then, 13 days later, on August 20th, 1964, Johnson signed the Economic Opportunity Act, creating the Office of Economic Opportunity, providing both the strategy and the ammunition to fight the domestic war on poverty. On January 4th, 1965, Johnson addressed Congress, urging them to pass legislation which later became a creation of programs, including Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, and Head Start, among others intended to win that Johnson called a war on poverty. Bill Downs, an ABC reporter, wrote, so much anti-poverty legislation was pushed through the Johnson Congress during the first session of the 89th Congress that both Democrats and Republicans warned that the nation could not digest all the idealistic projects and programs enacted into law. Local state officials would conduct power struggles over who would get and control this flood of federal money. And it was inevitable that some of the appropriations would be misused and political empires built at the expense of taxpayers. 2 months later, on March 8, 1965, the first combat forces arrived in Vietnam and provided ammunition for the anti-war movement. So under the cover of relentless war coverage in the anti-war movement, it became relatively easy for the Democratic-controlled Congress to pass legislation on their socialistic programs. Obviously, the destruction of the enemy's armed forces was not the highest aim. General Clausewitz goes on to say, therefore, the means cannot be considered in isolation from the purpose. Then what aim are you trying to achieve by fighting the war? If you know what you are trying to achieve, but then why are you not fighting it? If you can't answer these questions, you cannot define victory in the war, which makes it a lot harder to win war and to end it. Johnson's generals did define victory in Vietnam, but Johnson did not take the advice of volumes of military knowledge. General Clausewitz was right. As a result, Johnson's ambitious domestic visions, his real political objectives, compounded the problems of committing to and winning the Vietnam War. Johnson's political meddling, his abuse of power, micromanaging the war, and enforcing his crippling rules of engagement helped to dig a hole he couldn't get out of, and he threw that dirt on the serving soldier. Clausewitz also said, the military genius consists of all those gifts of mind and temperament that in combination bear on military activity. Johnson did not assemble the top military minds of the day. He assembled his political war managers, Kennedy's whiz kids, and civilian advisors to run the war. You will find out that after the 1964 elections, he rarely listened to his generals. Johnson's misinformed the nation and his military command by not disclosing his real political objectives. Let's not forget the simple realities of politics. Johnson not only had political ambitions, but a subsidiary and needed benefit of politicized war. It was to pay homage to the war profiteering merchants, the arms industry. Johnson received campaign financing contributions and other fringe benefits, and a number of them were directed to his wife. Additional probing bills in the mid-1960s, Johnson's Texas had war manufacturers and a big construction contractor who got filthy rich because of the war. The Texas companies are on the short list of many companies throughout the country that got dirty rich off the war. Congress became a half-hearted investigation, but eventually only linked some of the Vietnam's construction contractors to thousands of dollars of campaign contributions to Johnson's elections fund. However, the Democratic-controlled Congress downplayed war profiteering to suspend any further investigations into corruption. Let's look at a list of the Texas companies who profited. For example, the war completely transformed Brown and Root's fortune, as Robert Bryce has pointed out. Before Vietnam, Brown and Root was an arm's-length civilian contractor to the U.S. military. During the war in Vietnam, Brown and Root became part of the military. He also established Brown and Root as one of the biggest and most important construction companies in America. Their signs were everywhere. In 1965, Brandon Root joined forces with Raymond International, Morris Knudsen, and J.A. Jones Corporation to form RMK BRJ. If you were a Vietnam vet, you saw their signs any place. This consortium was awarded government contracts worth nearly $2 billion during the Vietnam War. Brandon Root obtained revenues from this deal of over $380 million, or 2.2 in 2006 dollars. George Brown was also able to negotiate a cost-plus contract. Whatever it spent doing each project, the government guaranteed it would pay the company a profit on top of its cost. That's a good way to control cost. Brandon Root expanded the harbors at Saigon, Cam Ranh Bay, and Da Nang. It also built the Phan Rang Air Force Base. By 1966, RMK BRJ had 52,000 employees working in South Vietnam. I believe that's a whole lot more than we had in the military. This included construction and engineering jobs normally done by soldiers from the Army Corps of Engineers. It was the Vietnam War that began the massive privatization of military duties. Abraham Ribicoff claimed that federal money was being squandered because of inefficiency, dishonesty, corruption, and foolishness. U.S. General Accounting Office agreed with Ribicoff in 1967. It published a report criticizing RMK BRJ, saying that the consortium could not account for the whereabouts of approximately $120 million worth of materials, which had been shipped to Vietnam from the United States. As Dan Browdy explained in the Halliburton Agenda, the public impression was that Brandon Root was part of a war profiteering machine that monopolized work in Vietnam, mistreated workers, and wasted millions of taxpayers' dollars. Despite the negative image, by 1969, Brandon Root had become the biggest construction company in America. It was not the only company in Texas to experience a rapid growth as a result of the Vietnam War. Bell Helicopter Corporation, based in Fort Worth, also made a great deal of money during the conflict. Johnson had enjoyed a long and profitable relationship with the company. Lawrence Bell had provided money for Johnson's 1948 election campaign. In fact, Bell supplied Johnson with the free use of a 47B helicopter. As Robert Bryce has pointed out, with a helicopter, Johnson could land right in the center of town, give a speech right on the landing spot, eliminating the need for time-wasting car trips. At this time, Bell Helicopter Corporation was based in California, however. With encouragement from Johnson, Bell moved the helicopter plant to Fort Worth and joined the Suite 8F group. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the Bell Helicopter Corporation was in serious financial difficulties. However, during the Vietnam War, the company's fortunes were transformed. UH-1 Huey was used extensively by the U.S. military during the war. By 1967, the Fort Worth plant was employing 11,000 workers who were producing 200 helicopters a month, 160 of which were for the American military. General Dynamics, also based in Texas, like the Bell Helicopter Corporation, had been close to bankruptcy in 1960. Once again, the Vietnam War helped to increase the profits. In 1967, some 83% of its sales were to the government. When the F-111 proved to be a complete disaster, the company was given the FB-111, the bomber's version of the TFX instead. This contract alone was estimated worth $24 billion. In 1968, General Dynamics was awarded with contracts worth $2,200 million. 12. These figures reveal a serious problem faced by the arms industry. What happens when the Vietnam War comes to an end? In 1967, the Electronics Industries Association commissioned a report into the future of U.S. military spending. It concluded that the future looks good as arms and control agreements during the next decade are unlikely. 13, it would seem that the arms industry no longer feared the negotiated deals favored by John Kennedy. This was confirmed by Samuel F. Downer, vice president of LTV Aerospace Corporation based in Texas. In an interview with Bernard D. Noiseta of the Washington Post, Downer argued that Johnson was committed to increasing military spending. If you're the president, you can't sell Harlem and Watts, but you can sell self-preservation. We're going to increase defense budgets as long as those bastards in Russia are ahead of us. The American people understood this. The real task, as always, was to convince the American public that the Soviet Union was ahead in the arms race and provided a significant threat to the security of the United States. The Texas companies weren't the only ones that got rich off the war. The congressional sharks also smelled blood in the water, and the military-industrial complex in their states also got wealthy. The chemical companies with Agent Orange, Big Pharma, exposing veterans era recruits to experimental vaccines. If you go to this site here, you can look it up yourself. And the research and development complex used Vietnam as proving grounds with their chemicals. Operation Igloo White. It was a 5-year from 1968 until 1973 failed effort to gather intelligence through the use of airborne electronics, surveillance devices. The U.S. military spent between $1 and $1.7 billion to design and build, and another $1 billion per year to operate over the 5-year life of the operation, possessing and controlling some of the most sophisticated technology in the Southeast Asia theater. Igloo White still rain questions as to its effectiveness. U.S. intelligence efforts, by whatever means from whatever agency, was evidently flawed, and its execution was failure. Again, the failure to shut down the Ho Chi Minh Trail in the early years would have saved billions of dollars and the lives of many of our soldiers, and would have simplified intelligence efforts. Who received the billions of dollars for the failed intelligence efforts of Operation Igloo White? Igloo White was the brainchild of a secretive group called the Jasons, and they were formed as a quasi-independent think tank in 1960, funded by ARPA, now it's called DARPA, the Defense Department's bleeding-edge technology arm. The Igloo White sensors were developed by some of America's most prominent electronic companies, including Texas Instruments, Magnavox, General Electric, Western Electric under their Sandia Corporation Research, and Hazeltine Corporation of Little Neck, New York. Additionally, from March 1967 until July 1972, the U.S. military spent over $3 million per year conducting a top-secret operations in Southeast Asia. The goal was to extend the monsoon seasons and flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the system of supplying routes used by the enemy in Vietnam. The Americans hoped to cause landslides, wash out river crossings, and just generally disrupt the movement of North Vietnamese troops. It was the first large-scale effort to manipulate the weather for military purposes, and it's still unclear how well it actually worked. Now that we know that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was deceitful fabrication, it becomes important not only to find out why, but let's pause and take a look into President Johnson's mind and temperament that, in combination with his character traits, his personas, and his trepidations, that all shaped his handling of the war, that direct bearing on our military decisions. We will find that his political meddling and his tripping over his ego all led to drag in a hole that he and his point man MacArthur could not recover from. It also became clear that Johnson's The Great Society, the war on poverty, was center stage, and unfortunately, Vietnam was a political diversion that for him and his party. It became a sideshow distraction that got out of hand. In his way, Johnson's true character is exposed from a few quotes from Ronald Kessler's in his book, Inside the White House, and also from Victor Lasky's book, It Didn't Start with Watergate. Kessler interviews with White House Secret Service agents, servants and aides, Air Force One stewards, military aides, and chefs gave solid source of these quotes. Vasco Lasky was credible source, also has credible sources for his quotes. Castle writes, if anyone was corrupted by power, it was Johnson. During the 1964 campaign, he betrayed himself as a peace candidate, contrast to his opponent, Barry Goldwater. Some are eager to enlarge the conflict in Vietnam, Johnson said of Goldwater during the campaign. They call upon us to supply American boys to do the job that Asian boys should do. A master manipulator, Johnson promptly enlarged the conflict and turned the White House into a chamber of deception, using Pentagon money to fund improvements to his ranch, lying about the cost of running the White House, and stealing government furniture and other items from the White House. When Johnson left the White House, he arranged for at least 10 flights to fly government property to his ranch, according to George Reedy, Johnson's press secretary. Johnson was a moody, impulsive man. His flight steward, McMillan, said he needed attention. He needed to assert his authority. He was a phony from the word go. His psychiatrist, who had seen many of his White House aides, said Johnson's humiliation of his employees was a way of exercising his power. Macmillan said that when military leaders raised questions about the wisdom of Johnson's policies in Vietnam, the president just brushed them off. Let's look at some of those notable causes and effect relationships of Johnson's political meddling. Johnson's escalation of the war under false pretense, his apprehensions, his meddling in military matters, and all his character flaws created a number of problems for military command decisions. Once Johnson made the decision to commit American ground forces in Vietnam, the foremost two questions were inedible. How many troops were needed and where would they come from? For the Pentagon brass, the answer was obvious. In order to win the war, they would need more than 1 million additional men, requiring call-up of the National Guard and reserves. General Harold K. Johnson, the Army's chief of staff, was a leading advocate for this approach. In late 1964, he tried to convince President Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara that up to 4 divisions should be used to seal off the border between North and South Vietnam, all the way to the Mekong River. Johnson did not follow the advice of the Pentagon brass. According to Shelby Stanton in his book, The Rise and Fall of an American Army, the rapid buildup of troops in 1965 created a logistics nightmare. Frankly, overnight, a major logistical foundation would have to be created in an undeveloped country where all areas were subject to Viet Cong observations and attack. They had no infrastructure. It resulted in compressed and accelerated training programs. Specialized training suffered most. The best trained units were the first ones into Vietnam. However, the combat experience of those initial units were lost after their first year in country. From then on, units were filled over and over with new replacements from the States. The Marine Corps also reduced recruit training from 12 to 8 weeks. It states, the website there you see, the individual rotation policy clearly created a number of implications for military command decisions and strategy. The individual rotation policy, in hindsight, clearly one of the worst ideas of the Vietnam War. The Army's personnel rotation policy was that individual soldiers served for 12 months before returning home. Officers spent a year in country, but only 6 of those months were in troop command. The policy was based on the assumption that it would be a short war. Their 1-year tours created a situation where almost half of America's combat forces were always rather new and inexperienced individual soldiers. As other critics wrote, there was an unspoken compact between lifers and grunts. The rules were simple. Stay alive, finish your year, and go home. In other words, take no risk. A lot of guys did. The Army's rotation policy had eroded the soldier's bond with his unit and replaced it with self-preservation. The most scathing criticism, however, focused on the policy that rotated officers through 6-month command tours. That policy, plus the inedible casualty rate among the Army's inexperienced young officers, many of whom were 90-day wonders, untested products of officer candidate school, led to an alarmingly high turnover rate for platoon leaders and company commanders. In combat units where leadership experience and sense of camaraderie were inexorably entwined with unit cohesion, and where unit cohesion marked the difference between success and bloody failures on the battlefield, the rapid turnovers of officers was devastating. During my year in country, I had 5 second lieutenant platoon leaders and 4 company commanders. Think about that, folks. We were more experienced than any of them, yet they acted like gods. I posted sections from the above articles, and reference to the entire article was posted in 2 Vietnam veteran chat rooms. The question was asked, do you agree with the article? Over 98% of the respondents agreed with the article. Few of the following replies from veterans. Rod Clark, absolutely agree, but any change for the better would have meant a serious redirection of the government policies. They would have had to figure out a way to military win the war. Charles L. Hamilton says, many of our allies moved their entire divisions in and out of Nam as a single unit. Example, the Koreans rotated their Tiger Division in and out and the White Horse Division out every year. I was able to see this, and at one time, General Ngoc Luan told me how much he hated to see the U.S. piecemeal rotation because the Vietnamese were constantly training new advisors. Alan Cohen, very accurate assessment and equally applied to the Marine Corps combat units as well. Bruce Bining agrees, more so in the infantry. 6 months, you're just getting to know your troops. Went to Vietnam alone and maybe a bit scared. Come home after 10 and a half months as a door gunner and again alone and very confused. He's with the 2nd or 13th ASH headquarters, Black Cats, 1st Aviation Brigade in 69 and 70. And I'm going to stop it right there because I don't want to get too much farther in. That kind of starts giving you a little bit of the problems that were coming up as we're starting to get into the war and so forth. We really haven't started even getting into the war per se, but that kind of gives you the background and so forth. And our next show will be August 27th. Excuse me, August. I got carried away with August. It'll be January 27th. You don't have to wait that long. January 27th. By the way, January 27th, 1973 is the anniversary of the signing of Paris Peace Talks. So that'd be a good day to do the show. Also, on the 30th of January is the beginning of Tet. I would normally invite you to the Vietnamese American Association here in Raleigh, North Carolina, to attend their Tet Festival. But due to the COVID situation, they have canceled it this year. It is a great festival, but they will be celebrating Tet in their homes and so forth. But I hope you got something out of the show, and looking forward to our next show where we try to bring all this together and so forth. And it's political, but it's not political to a certain extent. But enjoy your week, and looking forward to seeing you the 27th of January, which we will continue on and find out more truths. And good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.